There, we are live.
I was holding my breath until we went live.
Hello, Pete.
Hi. How's it going?
Happy.
Oh no, I should turn off YouTube. I made the mistake of watching.
Oh,
I almost went into an infinite loop.
yes, me too.
So, do you have the questions in front of you?
I have a bunch of questions here. Thank you to everyone who's posted questions in the chat. For some reason, some of them disappeared, but we have them reposted on Blue Sky and elsewhere. So I hope we probably won't be able to get to everyone's question, but we'll do what we can. If we don't answer your question, it's probably because we can't think of what to say, which that it's too difficult for us or out of our area of expertise,
or too difficult for you.
The way I'm feeling right now,
I'm filled up with electrolytes. I'm ready for anything.
Okay, well, I'll push those over to you. But please don't be offended if we don't get to your question. It won't be because we thought it was a bad question. That certainly won't be.
Yeah, along those lines, I just want to really elaborate on how completely disorganized we are normally. And then the disorganization multiplies when we are trying to do this multitasking thing, because talking about philosophy and not just going is very difficult. It takes more brain power than I normally am able to fire up. So it's very difficult to keep track of who asked the question first, who is the most meritorious, who asked more than one question. So this is going to be pretty close to random, and no offense intended.
Absolutely. And it's also hard sometimes to give an answer that both reflects what you want to say, what I might want to say, and also, but which I think will be useful or interesting to the person who asked the question, because sometimes I'm tempted to go off on a tangent that is something that interests me about that question, but maybe isn't the actual focus that prompted the person to ask it. So, and of course, since don't have you phoning in, I suppose that might be a possibility sometimes to have a phone in. I think it could be done, but we're not doing it today. So we're trying to interpret your questions, doing philosophy on the fly, and trying to work out what sort of answer would be most useful to you. So bear with us.
Hilarious.
If we can make it funny, that's even better. Yes, definitely. I mean, that's the okay. And Mark is there. There's a Mark there, which is always good to see.
Oh my God!
So where do we want to?
A Mark.
Mark. Where do we want to start? Pete, have you?
There was an early question. I can't even see it now. But it was
they've been disappearing for some reason.
It's something about what have we changed our minds about?
Yes,
that was a question that was posted.
Was that by Scott? Was that by Scott? I think. I'm not sure.
Maybe.
Yes, Scott Weinrobe, I think.
Yes, who I believe said he had a work conflict.
Right.
He asked the question, and he'll watch the recording. But he's a big Suede head, or persuader.
Persuaders. Is that what
I looked up Suede head, and maybe we shouldn't be calling them Suede heads.
I thought of the 90s Britpop band.
Yeah, I think that's related to Suede heads.
Well, that's good for me. Okay, well, what have we?
Yeah, what have you changed your mind about, Keith? Anything?
Yeah, I've changed my mind on. I don't think I've changed my mind on momentous things, on the way my fundamental worldview. I've never been attracted to dualisms of any kind, or to theories that take mental properties to be fundamental. And one reason I've never been attracted to this is I just think they're uninteresting. They consciousness is fundamental. Okay, so we can't really say anything very interesting about it. We can't give a reductive explanation of it. We can't try and understand how it is constituted, how it evolved, or anything like that. It's just fundamental, and it seems like a cop out. And so I've never been interested in that. I've always wanted to find explanations for things, how things work. And I think that's, I don't particularly like labels like materialist or physicalist, but that's one reason why I suppose I'm in that camp, is because I want to see take things apart and see how they work. And that involves some sort of commitment to reductive explanation, to there being an explanation of how this thing does what it does. Now, I think, though, where I have changed my mind is on how I see that working out. I mean, I was at grad school in the early 90s, and at that time I was under the influence of, I guess, computationalist theories. Massive modularity was very popular, evolutionary psychology of the Santa Barbara schools. There's another sort of clunky mechanistic approach to understanding the mind, which was better than just treating it as fundamental. But I remember a colleague, David Owen, satirized it as, I think he was satirizing Fodor. He suggested a book titled "The Wires and Pulleys of the Mind," and it was a little bit like that, like thinking of the mind as a complicated machine, but but one that thought we could do everything in very broad functional terms, instead of getting down into the details of how neurotransmitters work and this sort of thing. And so while I've not given up functionalism, if neurotransmitters and so on matter, they matter because of what they do, that functional difference they make. But I think that matters a lot more than we tended to think back then. We tended to think we could do it all at a software level, really. So I think I've got more sophisticated in my thinking in that way, a lot more. But I haven't changed my outlook radically. What about you?
Yeah, I think there's a bunch of things I've changed my mind about. When I first started thinking about this philosophy of mind and cognitive science stuff as something more than just science fiction, because I really was very into science fiction in my early childhood and teens. And so, for example, when I was 14 years old, I had already been reading Omni magazine since I was 9, and was absorbing all this cyberpunk, the first cyberpunk stories before even Neuromancer came out in 1984. So I was really just into these ideas of artificial intelligence and robotics, and directly plugging your brain into the matrix and all that. Before I even had a computer, I'm reading these science fiction stories about that stuff. And it really connected with a kind of early impulse I've had that sounds like it was similar to yours, in the anti-dualism. I've never really found any kind of spiritualism or dualism attractive. As a very, very, very small child, my parents would get me these books that would sit alongside my Dr. Seuss books, these tiny little science books. There's one about ants, and another about the Apollo moon mission, and another one about atoms. And the idea that you could explain everything in terms of this sciencey and mathy stuff just made an enormous amount of sense to me. So I didn't know about the word physicalism or reductionism or naturalism, but I was one of those since basically I could read, because I was reading these Isaac Asimov books way over my head and all that. So I haven't changed my mind about that. But what I have changed my mind about, again, this might be very similar to you, is how complicated it all is. So by the time I'm entering undergraduate and taking college level philosophy classes, I've digested the Hofstadter and Dennett Mind's Eye many times over.
What a fantastic book that is, Pete.
Yeah, so it's so good, and someone should make a sequel to that. They really should. And I just like that was my Bible. I probably would just like go to sleep with it if I, didn't already have plenty of stuffed animals. I would sleep with that under my pillow. So by the time I'm taking college philosophy classes, I've already kind of absorbed this like Churchland kind of picture of like let's just it's brains. Come on, you dumb philosophers, brains. And one of the first like really heavy philosophy classes I took was from this guy at the University of Illinois, since deceased, Hugh Chandler, and he was running this this entire semester metaphysics class focused on Hilary Putnam, mostly like 80s, late 70s, early 80s era Hilary Putnam.
Mm-hmm.
And there was all this stuff like very adjacent to Quine, stuff about indeterminacy of reference and kind of irrealism about mental contents, and some of that stuff is very close to like Nelson Goodman style skepticism about a lot of these things. And I remember reacting very strongly against that. I in some ways was like a little Pat Churchland, and I was really would annoy the hell out of my professor because I wasn't getting the philosophical problems. I was just like, look, it's brains. Of course, a brain in a vat would have all of my mental states if it was internally, physically, just like my brain. Of course, it would be able to think about, the 1920 World Expo or its 9th birthday, or that maybe there's things outside of vats. And that kind of like skepticism about representational content or even like psychological categories and the eliminativism about psychological states that went with that, that was offensive to me, but in an intoxicating way, right? So probably it's a common-ish experience that when you get into philosophy, you get an enemy. There's something that like really
Yeah,
I believe I'm not misrepresenting Richard Brown to say that he had an early philosophy experience of reading Dennett and thinking like, that's nuts. That guy's got to be wrong. I had the opposite. I was thinking like Hilary Putnam and those guys, they have to be wrong. And the what's right is something like kind of a flat-footed brainy functionalism or something like that. And I have over the years begin to think that that era of Putnam and even later Putnam and his pals, they were right. And so I've really kind of drifted into a lot of views I think that are regarded as crazy or evil about that stuff.
Okay, give an example. Give us an example of the crazy or evil.
Well, I think the view that there's some kind of fact of the matter about how brain states relate to the rest of the universe, such that they constitute an aboutness or a reference relation, and that's one of the basic building blocks of truth and knowledge of the objective world. I think that whole package is bullshit.
Yeah. So
that's just a bunch of talk of and there's really nothing. There's nothing for a theory of truth or a theory of reference to do, and
the challenge for that sort of view, it seems to me, I mean, I understand the arguments right, and I'm sympathetic to them, but the challenge is not to sort of lose the baby with the bathwater. We don't want to be in a world of post-truth and post-meaning. We want to retain the everyday role of this for this talk, while not making it do the sort of philosophical heavy lifting that it can't do. No.
I mean, if you there might be certain things about which you deliberately pull the wool over your eyes. And wrestling with the eliminativism problem has actually really infiltrated a lot of what I think about philosophically, perhaps in a more private kind of mode. I don't generally broadcast it for public consumption, but when I think about things like whether God exists, which at a very young age I decided I was an atheist, like around age 7 or age 8, one of my grandfathers died, and he was the person in my extended family that I was closest to, and that really affected me in a very strong way, not just emotionally but metaphysically, because I was confronted in this very real way with, does Grandpa go to heaven? And I had decided at that point, look, I already know that Santa Claus is bullshit. Does heaven and Jesus and God really have any more going for it than Santa Claus? And so I, like, in my private heart of hearts, because my parents were sending me to Catholic grade school, I wasn't going to start advertising that I was an atheist, but I self-conceived as being an atheist from like age 8 to age 38 or 48, somewhere in the 30s and 40s. I started really thinking about the eliminative materialism question. Forget about God. How about people that have beliefs and desires and make promises and keep promises? Are those real? And I started realizing, like, well, it kind of sucks to say no, they're not real, that they just need to go in the direction of Santa Claus. But in the same frame of mind, I could see how they're about as real as money, which in a very important sense, money is bullshit. We could agree that a plastic coin is worth $1 billion, and the universe is not going to step in and say, whoa, hey, well, like, maybe the universe will tell us you can't make water boil and be 0 Celsius at the same time, but the universe doesn't care what we say about that plastic coin. You want it to be worth $1 billion? Knock yourself out. And maybe is Keith my friend, or does my wife love me, or do I even have a wife and not just a meat bag that is in my spatial proximity? There's this whole package about which it would be really great to have a positive answer, and the only way to have a positive answer is to kind of decide in this, like, Sartrean existential or Camus sort of, like, you gotta. It's up to you. It's up to you.
Well, I will just go Donatian on all of this and say, do these ways of talking, do they do work for us? Do they enable us to get a better grip on this?
But you could raise the same sorts of questions about work. What's that?
Well,
there was a cute little rhetorical move that Putnam made in the big flare up between Putnam and David Lewis in all these debates about Putnam's so-called model theoretic argument, which is very adjacent to Quine's indeterminacy of reference. And Lewis was trying to say, like, look, here, all this stuff about content and reference and how do our brain states match onto the world, and it can all be solved with causation. In a very brief sketch, that's the Lewis position, causation. And Putnam's response was to say, I might mess this up a little bit, but it was like, look, Lewis, you're standing there holding up this sign, this cardboard sign that says representation on it, and I'm raising questions about whether there's such a thing as the right way for that sign to relate to the rest of the universe. and you think you're going to solve the problem by holding up another sign that has the word causation written on it. And now, did Putnam give an argument there? I don't know, but it was fucking hilarious and devastating. It just picturing David Lewis, kind of like Donald Duck and Bugs Bunny. They'd hold up these signs that say duck season or rabbit season. There's David Lewis holding up a sign that says causation, and somehow this sign is going to fix all the problems that we've raised for all the other signs. And so when in some ways I identify with lots of people who get labeled pragmatists, like Quine and Rorty and Dennett. But there's a kind of reductive pragmatism that I find really kind of besides the point, because it assumes we have some idea what working means or what usefulness means. You could raise all the same problems. I'm sorry, it's Daffy Duck. Alan is very good at correcting us about cultural references. Yes, Daffy Duck, not Donald Duck.
We don't want to get too much into the weeds on this one because I've got a lot of questions.
Anyways, I've changed my mind from good solid Churchlandian scientific realism to just crazy nutso Rorty Derrida. We're just making shit up. We must conceive Sisyphus happy, because otherwise.
There's a coherent position in between those. It's pretty much the one that Dan Dennett advocated, and I'd urge you to sort of pull back to that one a little bit. I mean, what does love? Is love real? Well, the point, does this talk of love, does it help you to sort of articulate and negotiate? That's not quite the right word. The relations between you and your partner. Is it is telling her that you love her? Is that helping to, as it were, construct and I'm not sure what words I want here, your relationship? That's what it. That's it.
But part of embracing a worldview that has love in it as an important thing, it involves not sitting there and thinking like, well, it's actually quite useful for orchestrating social interactions. Like, part of putting that hat on, the love hat, is to not carve things up into that kind of language, while also knowing that on some level, like, yeah, that is what's going on, right?
Yeah, well, but that's perfectly possible. That's exactly a Dennettian position. You adopt a certain stance, you operate within that stance, the romantic stance, let's call it.
Yeah,
you operate within it, fine. And then someone challenges you and says, "Come on, how do you defend the use of this stance? What's the point of it? How does it work?" Starts pressing you in the philosophical underpinnings of it, and then you switch back to doing the meta stuff. Yeah, sure, you stop adopting the stance when you try to explain what the stance is, but I don't see that you need to say, well, there's really nothing of, it's just the world constrains the stances that we can. Well, it doesn't. I was going to say constrains the stances we can take on it. It constrains which stances are going to do some useful work, and work again, which are going to. Well, you've got to cash this out pragmatically somehow. They're going to, ultimately help us, make our way through this bizarre and incomprehensible existence. Anyway, I do see where you're going, but I think maybe I need to try and pull you back a little bit. Let's see if we can get another question.
Can I just go on then? Try to be the guy that gets the last word in, but I would one thing I would recommend everybody that's interested in this sort of debate is to look at the various points in which Dennett and Rorty have gone head to head. That's very instructive, because in some ways those guys are occupying very similar spaces with respect to stuff about knowledge and stuff about morality and stuff about qualia, but they're very different also, and they get explicit with each other about what their difference is and why Dennett goes more in a science optimistic sort of way, and why Rorty is kind of attracted to what I'm jokingly calling the evil and crazy view. Anyway, that if you want to see continuations of this that aren't just me and Keith, take a look at the various times those guys have written about each other.
Great. Okay, so do you want to choose a question, or shall I? Which do you want to?
Did I choose the last one?
I can't remember.
I think I did. So why don't you choose one?
Okay, well, there's one here from Alan, which is there a classic philosophical dilemma, conundrum, or paradox once fairly popular you think philosophers don't talk enough about anymore? Nothing comes to mind, actually.
Oh gosh, I have several.
Go on then. Go on. I've asked the question, but you give us the answer.
Well, two of my favorite ones that I feel like get insignificant attention, and I've got more where those came from. One is the inconsistent triad of intentionality, and this gets us into stuff like about Meinong and all that.
Right.
But one way of putting what the inconsistent triad is supposed to be is something like we can think about things that don't exist. Thinking about things is a relation to the things thought about, and you cannot bear relations to things that don't exist.
Oh, we're in unicorn territory, folks.
Oh, I didn't bring up unicorns, Keith, but if you're obsessed with unicorns, I'm happy to. I'm sure I have like several unicorn figurines right near my desk here. Yeah, it's a unicorn territory, but maybe that one's you've got to be into philosophy of language or philosophy of mind to care much about that. But I think people tend to just assume, because of the dominance of realism in Anglo-American philosophy from, say, the 40s onward, they just don't worry about the non-existence problem and assume that it's some kind of relation, and the relation is like causal, informational.
But if you're not a realist about reference anyway, why does this matter? I mean, there's no more problem with it. Referring to non-existent things than referring to existent things.
Often with these triads, and my other favorite one is also a triad. There's a bunch of different isms that you could pick, which is basically synonymous with picking one of the three things and saying like, okay, that's the one I reject, right? So if you have any kind of realism, that's usually just going to go along with saying that, yeah, it's thinking about is this relation something like a head world relation, and now you've got to do special mental gymnastics to say what the heck is going on with alleged claims of non-existence. But right, yes, here's the other one that I feel like in many circles, people I think are just not familiar with it, or if they are familiar with it, they think they've got an easy answer to it, and that's something that often gets called the Munchausen trilemma or Agrippa's trilemma, which is a thing in epistemology about, you could put it in terms of justification, but that's the one about, I'm probably going to screw this up because I don't care very much about epistemology to bother having this at my fingertips, but it's something like if something is if justified beliefs are always justified by some other belief, then that would go either into an infinite regress or a loop, or there's some beliefs that are self-justified, and so you block the both the regress and the loop, and the various problems or ways in which these are each kind of hard to give up, or individually unappealing. If it's an infinite chain of this justifies this, then in some sense you never have justification. Just like if what's holding the earth up is an infinite sequence of turtles, then you never have any explanation of what's holding any of that stuff up, because you never have the bottom turtle that is holding all the other ones up. So you're actually going to get justification from the infinite series, nor are you going to get justification from the loop, where if A justifies B and B justifies A, then it again looks like neither of them are justified. But then if the buck stops somewhere with some self-justifying justifiers, well, now you need something like a plausible candidate of what those would be. And now what is it going to be? Qualia? You know what I think
they were invented
qualia.
for. That's what they were invented for. That's their job description. That's what they were. That's specifically what they were hired to do.
Part of what makes me say that the Munchausen or Agrippa trilemma is underappreciated is that I think a lot of people who love qualia and the qualia wars don't know the epistemological problematic that gave birth to them, and how much of this stuff is coming out of sense data theory, which itself is coming out of problems about trying to figure out what the heck empirical knowledge would be. All this epistemological stuff. And you've got these people that jump into it thinking it's just a metaphysical problem.
Mm-hmm. So what do you do with justification? You're not limited about justification, are you? Or
oh gosh. Well, it's all part of my getting evil and crazy in my old age is to think that at best, justification is stuff that we kind of construct on the fly for various purposes. So there's a whole host of moves I find appealing in philosophy, and this is one of them, where I go for what gets called the skeptical solution instead of the straight solution.
Mm-hmm.
I have similar things to say about meaning or whatever. Mm-hmm. So there's no such thing as justification in the sense that some beliefs have it and some beliefs don't, and there's some fact of the matter about how much justification any belief has. What happens instead is that there's this kind of vague game that we kind of loosely agree on the rules to, and it's the game of asking and giving justifications. So in some contexts, I might challenge you on certain claims, because you'll tell me, like, your electricity has been out for the past 2 weeks. And I say, Keith, obviously that Christmas tree behind you is powered by electricity. What the fuck are you talking about? So I challenge you. Like, what? And you either give me an answer that I'm satisfied by or you don't. And there's no further question to be answered in any kind of ultimate way about, well, did Keith give a good answer? Either he answers it in a way that eventually like shuts me up and makes me not want to bother him anymore, or he doesn't. And there's no further norms to apply. There's no.
It's almost like I'm speaking to the ghost of the late Ludwig Wittgenstein.
Yeah, well, I wouldn't want to say I got it from him, but there are certain resemblances that are eerie.
I'd say yes, well, okay, well, it's yeah, I mean, I could say it's just a very pragmatist approach again. I mean, it seems that what you're moving along the pragmatist spectrum from all positions seem to be broadly pragmatist. Is that right? Would that be fair to you?
Well, see, the thing I don't like about pragmatism is that it kind of sounds like you're trying to adopt some neutral stance whereby you could adjudicate everything else and say, look, let me tell you what's really going on. What's really going on is that we're all just trying to maximize hedons, or what's really going on is we're trying to fulfill our biological imperative that we got from Darwin, or what's really going on. But all of these problems about you name it, meaning, reference, truth, also apply to what's really going on. And so, part of the skeptical solution, I think it's important to say, look, it's not pragmatism either. Pragmatism is too much philosophy. And part of what's being recommended here is to unplug the philosophy module.
Well, I'm again, Ludwig. I can see why you like the term quietism. It's basically what you're saying is, stop it. Just stop it, you guys.
Well, if you want to stop, I mean, like, so Wittgenstein reports being really tortured by this philosophy stuff, and feeling like it made him miserable. But he also had this impulse, like he wanted to solve it. He wanted to be able to say, like, okay, listen, this is the way out of the fly bottle is that way. And I'm much more attracted to a view that kind of is able to see, like, it's you could have fun. You want to do philosophy, and that's fine. There's nothing.
So it's like staying the fly bot, but just buzz around and have some fun there.
Sure. Like the kind of like sanitizing, like, look, we got to stop doing philosophy so we could do the real stuff, which is science. I find that like a little that's not my jam. Like, I reserve the right. I don't know if other people I would recommend this to. But I reserve the right to adopt a viewpoint whereby, like, well, art, religion, philosophy, science, these are all just kind of different hats one could wear. And I, Pete Mandic, can choose to wear whichever one I want. And there's no one hat I'm better off wearing. Because to even ask that question, like, well, which one is the better one? Is it better? Like, my child let's say my child is something terrible, medically terrible has happened to them. Am I better off with a scientific hat or a religious hat? And I don't think that there's any kind of general answer to that question, even for Pete Mandic. It's so context dependent that, maybe I would be better off in certain cases giving up looking for a cure and just trying to get right with the fact that my child's going to die, and to guide them family into this.
I mean, you just said better off. Again, that's like my what works. I mean, then I'm going to say, what's your metric for being better off?
The thing about pragmatism is it sounds like it has a cure-all. That it's somehow there's a way of taking all the problems and just reducing them to like a problem of utility.
So how about a sort of particularist pragmatism? Does that float your boat?
No. Because there's lots of other times, if we go back to like a conversation between the two of us, there might be lots of times where I would recommend some kind of general rule, or I would advert to what look like general principles. Maybe you're asking me about your car, or you're asking me, like, how are you going to get the hockey stick onto the bus? And I would say, like, Keith, come on, Pythagorean theorem. Right. So there's going to be a bunch of different moves where, like, a particularist might just have to say, we just always have to start from scratch. Like, we can never just say, like, pretty sure Pythagoras figured this one out 2,000 years ago. It's
it could be particularist about which hat you put on in any particular situation, whether you put on the scientist hat, whether you put on the philosopher hat, whether you put on the theological hat or whatever. So that's the kind of particularism I mean, particularly about which bag of tools you grab on any given occasion. So how about that? I mean, which again brings us back to stances, I think. It's, how you're going to look at this problem. What conceptual framework are you going to bring to it? Which thinking tools, which and so on. And ultimately, the choice, I don't want to say the choice is just a whim, because there's definitely better to think in terms of vaccines and so on when you're deciding how to best prepare your young infant to face the onslaught of bacterium and viruses that it will face. So I think we're getting a bit in the weeds here, Pete. Let's have a look at.
Well, in summary, Pete is nuts, and Keith is scientific. And
well, I obviously that's I think I have a look at this one. What does Keith think of the primary secondary quality distinction? I buy illusionism, but I think there's something to the idea of mental colors construed as patterns of reactions, including affect. Well, Yes, here's something I could have said in response to the other question about something that's neglected and should be given more attention. And this is something I get from Nick Humphrey, which is the distinction between perception and sensation. None of them, neither conceived in terms of quality, of course, but the distinction between gathering information about the world and reacting to that information, and about one's own condition. So we have sensory systems pick up all sorts of signals from the from our environment, all sorts of sense to all kinds of stimulation, environment, and extract them, use that to model aspects of the world. So that's perception. But there's also bundled into our experience, there's also a reaction to that. There's a huge raft of psychological reactions that are triggered by that stimulation. A host of beliefs, which you would stress in this bit, but also emotional reactions, affective reactions, associations, memories are triggered, or even if not triggered, they're primed. There's a whole lot of priming. The whole system is kind of readjusted subtly in the light of the current stimulation. And I think that when people talk about what it's like to see something, they're essentially talking about our sense, our inchoate, inchoate's not perhaps quite the word, our undefined sense of the nature of this response that's happening in us. And so when we talk about, about secondary qualities, I'm not really very keen on the distinction, the way that it's made, but I think we're talking about the kind of response pattern that certain wavelengths of light stimulate in us. So seeing something yellow puts me into yellow reaction mode, which is constituted by a whole host of beliefs, associations, affective reactions, and so on. And I can be put into that mode by things that we all agree are yellow, but also by things that we wouldn't call yellow, but are presented in strange lighting conditions, also by fatiguing my blue senses and looking at a white wall and seeing a yellow after image and so on. So to that extent, I think I don't want to talk about mental colors, because I want to talk about complex patterns of psychological reaction to stimulation, which I think are what this talk of mental colors is kind of gesturing at, but describing in a misleading way, as if it's something that it's like a kind of internal version of the outer color that we attribute to the surfaces that are the distal objects that are stimulating our eyes. So I think there's something to these distinctions. The people wouldn't have made them for so long if they had absolutely nothing to them at all. But I think they're misconceived, and they're used to build what's the word I want to say? They used to build theories of perception and theories of consciousness that are deeply misguided. Something like that. Yeah. Dan looked totally convinced by it. Go on, you have a go. Tell me where I'm wrong on that, Pete.
Well, I just to start very simply, both the secondary primary quality distinction and the sensation perception distinction are distinctions I hate, and I think they're terrible. So let's just start there and work our way up or down, as it were. I think that it's okay. There's lots of context in which we could talk about things that are really there independent of some organisms, and what are the organisms' reactions. But almost all of the old-timey ways of trying to draw this distinction, the secondary property quality distinction, are junk, right? So one old one was the primary qualities were the common sensibles, in the sense that
Yeah,
different different sensory
multimodal.
modalities like touch and vision will all give you shape and number.
Yeah.
But only vision gives you color, and only smell gives you taste. And
Mhm.
so that's one way of carving it up that I think just doesn't stand up to any kind of pressure. In many ways, I think Barclay was right about the ways in which the all the sorts of things you'd want to say about secondary qualities. You could say the same sorts of things about
Mhm.
primary qualities. There's all sorts of shape properties that seem like they're egocentric shape properties. Um,
Mhm.
when you really start thinking about stuff like that's very important for all sorts of spatial perception is stuff like parallax and perspective and um, the way all sorts of geometric properties are about the facts about the organism and the organism's eye. All sorts of
Mhm.
like nitpicky things about like lens aberration and stuff like that. There's really no way of carving out the real space from the sensed space or the sensory reaction to space. And the more we learn about what space is, the more and more it just seems like perceptual space. I mean, I don't want to give Kant any credit, but it's not like space and number are just out there waiting, but colors are just these figments of the mind. In some way, they're all on equal footing. And about the sensation and perception distinction, I must confess to be heavily under the influence of one of my earliest mentors in philosophy, my long ago undergraduate philosophy of mind professor, who subsequently became long term friend, Kathleen Akins. Um,
Mhm.
and so I worked with her in her McDonald Foundation project in philosophy and the neurosciences through the early 2000. That pretty much ran from 2000 to like 2005 or so, and then we stayed in touch beyond that.
Mhm.
And she is very much like her central project through her whole professional career has been about like looking at sensory systems, primarily
Mhm.
vision and color, but a lot of her early work was about like thermo
Mhm.
reception, and some of it was just like really digging into um, what it's like to be a bat
Mhm.
from the very real sense of what spatial properties they have access to through their
Mhm.
I'm gesturing at my bat ears through their
Mhm.
echolocation. Um, very very cool stuff. That one way of putting it is that there's very little that's given to sensation. There's really, in fact, nothing for this concept of sensation to do. um, that at a very flat-footed way of describing the theory about color perception or anything else, is we have these like conceptual propositional attitudes that we go into, um, and they have contents like, oh, that's a red rubber ball, and thinking of it as being a ball and being rubber is really important for
Mhm.
the
Mhm.
brain mind's ability to arrive at the conclusion that it's red.
Mhm. Mhm.
um, so there isn't some kind of like sensational redness that comes into the system and then later on gets conceived as being the redness that goes with the three-dimensional ball object that also has the material composition of being made out of rubber. All of that stuff, the ballness, the rubberness, um, is kind of informing the redness. And
Yeah, no,
so
I wouldn't, I don't, I think, yeah, I don't think I was,
so
when I
it's in
use
some
the word
sense,
sensation,
one way
I
of
think
putting
you're,
it is that it's all perception, and there's really no scientifically respectable way of sorting like these perceptions are the perceptions that are really just perceptions of our internal reactions, and these other perceptions are about real reality that's out there anyway. The
I,
mechanisms whereby you would come to have a perception of something as being square, or of there being 2 versus 3 dogs, or this dog being purple versus red. There's no carving, there's no joints that would be supported by a scientific theory of how perception works that would allow you to retain anything that looks like the secondary primary quality distinction or the sensation perception distinction. So in some sense, it's all perceptions, and what they're perceptions of are secondary qualities. That if you really want to get your head around how this all works, you have to kind of think of the Umwelt and the ecological niche that the body has been adapted to orient towards its niche. And it's very much scientific, right? It's not like saying, oh, it's just like your opinion, man. But it's saying, like, if you really want to have like a scientific theory of how color vision works or how thermal perception works, this detection model, if there's a property out there, and then this creature evolved to like lock onto and track that property, that's garbage. That's just fantasy. It doesn't actually work that way.
I agree though, but I still think there's I see. Okay, so let's think of the world in terms of affordances. Okay, so what we learn to track are affordances, and that is properties of the world that are significant for us in terms of inviting us or prompting us to perform some action. That might afford eating, it might afford running away or whatever.
But importantly, an action that you wouldn't come to be able to have that action unless this got routed through what we think of as like thought, belief, and
depending on what you mean.
Past empirical knowledge.
Well, depending on what you mean by thought and belief. I mean, we could have this for fairly cognitively unsophisticated creatures. I mean, insects and so on. But if you're happy to have thoughts and beliefs in them, yeah. But so there's a kind of, let's put it like this: there's a sort of dual aspect. You're tracking stuff in the world, and you're tracking it by its effect on you. You're tracking stuff that means something for you. Okay, so the world is informed by you, by you as a center of reaction, if you like. Okay, so and some of the affordances we track are going to be pretty hardwired in by evolution. Others are going to be ones that sensitivities that we've developed because they're significant for us. You think, a bit of history of that, your experience tunes you into some things more than others. You become more sensitive to certain things than others, depending on what's pleased you or frightened you or whatever in the past. So, okay, you can't pull this apart and that's one component, that's going to, but there are two aspects to experience. Experience is both, if you reflect on the character of experience, as theorists of consciousness keep asking us to do, you're not just reflecting on something out there, and you're not just reflecting on something in here, you're reflecting on an interaction between you and the world. That's what experience is. And you're just trying to describe what experience is like. You're at the same time saying something about what appears to be, I don't like out there because there isn't an out in this, but there's something in your environment and something about its meaning for you. And those two things, I agree, are bound up. But the point is,
I just want to be. I think it's important to bring something that you might want to call conceptual thought or empirical knowledge, something much more learning dependent and amodal or polymodal. So here's one way of kind of setting up the sorts of problems that would lead you to this view. Thinking about vision. And perceiving things with respect to their surface color. And so, it seems fairly obvious and uncontroversial to say that we see things sometimes as being gray and sometimes as being white and sometimes as being blue. And when we look at the sensory transducers, like if we look at the mechanisms at the earliest stage of vision, like in the eye, not even the retinal ganglia, but the first line of defense against the electromagnetic spectrum, we've got this sensory transducers that you could characterize them as detecting wavelength or responding to a combination of wavelength and intensity. Like it gets kind of technical to figure out exactly what does trigger them. But it also seems fair to say that whatever they're doing in the eye, none of them individually are opacity detectors. None of them individually are able to detect whether something is made out of wood or made out of glass. All insofar as we have any kind of appreciation or take on the world, such that some of it is made out of objects that are opaque and some of it is made out of objects that are translucent. That object is a piece of concrete in the noonday sun. That object over there is a piece of silk, like at dusk. All of that stuff depends on, what do you want to call it? Empirical knowledge, past learning, things that aren't transduced in the eye.
Sure.
Insofar as that you're able to perceive this as like a crumpled up shirt versus like a discarded tin can versus just like a weird shadow that's cast by the leaves above me, that's not given to the immediate array that's presented to the retina.
Sure.
That's going to involve, and I'm pointing at my concepts or my thoughts or my empirical knowledge, whatever you want to call it. And so part of what I'm rebelling against is saying like, there's no such thing as sensation, or part of why I kind of cringe a little bit when you talk about experience is there's a kind of tendency in philosophy of mind and the psychology perception to think you could do this thing that Husserl recommends, whereby, the epoche, you bracket everything. So you bracket whether there's an objective world out there causing these, whatever you want to call them, perceptions, sensations. We bracket the so-called external world that might be the distal cause of these experiences, but we also bracket this other thing that is the rest of the mind. That's what I'm pointing at. So we bracket our thought theories, our hypotheses, our interpretations, and we just focus on the raw material, the given. Right. So there's a way of thinking about experience that kind of goes hand in hand with thinking that you could actually do that there's something there to do, that there's the experience itself, and it's separate from the external objective world, and it's also separate from your thoughts and your beliefs. And that, I think, is importantly bullshit.
Well, indeed. I mean, that's qualia you're talking about. So yes, I totally agree.
It's not just qualia. I mean, one way of thinking about qualia is it's part of a package that has primarily to do with like Nagel and Bloch. But some sensation talk is
well, it's a sense datum or something. It's some sort of it's
there's like
there's some the idea is it's the upshot of the perceptual processes that is then it's what's presented in the Cartesian theater. It's the upshot of the perceptual process that is consumed with.
Is that there's something that is like early in this causal stream from the immediate like irritation of the body's periphery to the eventual thing that would result in you saying a sentence, that there's something early in the stream, which of course there's something early in the stream. Of course there's streams of causation, and there's the earliest step inside of my body. But it's this conjunctive claim that there's this early step that we also have some kind of introspective access to. That it has some kind of like mental quality or character that has a certain epistemological profile, like, for example, that I have introspective access to it, and that maybe even like later on it could pick up conceptual associations or something like that. It's that second part that I think is like pernicious and it just will lead us into error. And if you don't even care about philosophy, you're just trying to do a scientific theory perception, it's just bad science. That if you look at like contemporary neuroscience of color vision, the idea that there's this early stage and that's where the colors go in, and then later on you attach that to things like shape or judgments about material composition. My understanding of the contemporary literature is that that's just rejected as old-fashioned and debunked.
Well, look, I think I mean, I agree with everything you've just said, and that's why I'm I don't think there are any such things as sense data or qualia or whatever that will be a kind.
You did bring up Humphrey, who has very interesting views on this. That I don't want to blow off Nick Humphrey's views.
Well,
I'm not
then
sure
that's
how to accommodate them.
that's how I was trying to use that's what I had in mind when I talked about the sensation perception, the use he makes of it there. I'm not
Yeah.
trying to go back into, but what was the point I was going to make? I mean, introspective reports, what are they sensitive? I don't know. They're sensitive to all sorts of stuff. I mean, there's not some sort of distinct level of processing that is, sort of tapped by the introspective reports. I mean, heaven knows what it's an empirical question, but there isn't something that's, we're directly acquainted with when we, it's not nonsense, I think
Can I try this?
Wait a minute. I think
sorry.
there's a danger though, and this is, I think, where we differ mainly, is that you say all this sort of tradition of thinking primary, secondary qualities, perception, sensation, it's all bullshit. Well, okay, I kind of agree with you. It's when you start to do science, it just all falls apart. It just doesn't bear up. But this is why I want to talk about illusion. But still, it gets a grip on people's thinking about them, the way people self-conceptualize, and you can get them to this very easily simply by getting them to stare at something blue, fixate on something blue, and then look at a white wall, and then say, that quality there, that yellow quality, what's that? Where is it? It's not out there. Where is it? And they very quickly get this idea that there's a yellowness there that is not out in the world, and that is somehow in them, created by them, and that they are directly acquainted with it. Now, as you've just said, that's kind of got to be bullshit. But it's a powerful intuition that is so powerful that some extraordinarily clever people build huge metaphysical theories on that very intuition. And I think we need not to trust the intuition, because it's, for all the reasons you said, it doesn't hold up. But we need to give a psychological explanation of why that intuition is so powerful, and that is going to have something to do with introspection in some ways. It's going to have something to do with the processes that lead to our reports. Oh, I'm experiencing something yellow. Okay, right. Now that doesn't mean that. Yeah, so that's why I want to talk about illusion rather than just elimination. I want to explain why people fall into this, what you've termed bullshit.
Yeah, so I mean, maybe you'll hear this as a concession, or I definitely intended it as a sympathetic remark. And maybe it makes me an illusionist, but it definitely makes me a Humphreyisist. Mm-hmm. One of the things about Nick Humphrey's work that I've found really compelling is something that you can divorce from these issues that I was trying to raise about, like, well, how does color perception work? Is there a sensation and then later on a perception? Is there an early stage that we have? There's a way of using this language of like sensation or experience to mark a different distinction, which is something like the distinction between, like me hearing your voice or me looking at you on the screen versus my wife downstairs thinking like, oh yeah, Pete's talking to Keith Frankish again. Right. Yeah. There's just, or even me thinking like, oh, next week I'm going to talk to Keith Frankish yet again. That there's this distinction between what we might call mere thinking, like just entertaining the concept or something like that, and then this other thing, which maybe is just as much conceptual and late stream, but nonetheless it has this grip on us. And Humphreys talks about things like, why do humans have orgasms? That's not happening in every part of the natural kingdom. Not every sexual reproducer seems to be having an amazing time, but humans seem really into it. And if you've never had an orgasm, like, you're missing out. It's pretty great. But it's kind of evolutionarily very unusual. And another thing that he points out is like all the attention in our literature, all of like so much writing, and not just in fiction, but in nonfiction, is just dedicated to like focusing on like sensory details, like really relishing in the way, this particular landscape looked, or what the inside of the castle, the sounds and the smells, and it's so important to us to kind of dwell on that. And he's got this story that I'm not sure he's fully convinced himself of the story, but it's a very interesting one whereby in because of our biological heritage as a social animal that has a lot of culture that's about really kind of thinking of individuals as contributing something to the group in a way that's much more complicated than simply like, well, yeah, help us hunt or please mate with some of us, or help take care of these babies. But like, please don't commit suicide, even after like your leg has been chewed off by a wolf. Please stay alive. There's a certain kind of cultural, evolutionary niche we find ourselves in, whereby the illusion of there being this really great, amazing chunk of our mental life that isn't great or amazing aside from the fact that we take it to be great and amazing. That's the illusionist part. There's nothing intrinsically great and amazing about it. It doesn't have the intrinsic irreducible quality of greatness or amazingness. Like, what the fuck would that even be?
Right.
Right. That's like saying that some like certain humans are just intrinsically sexually attractive, and if no chimpanzee wants to mate with them, then those chimpanzees are just wrong. Like, that's insane to think that like sexiness is that objective. It's got to be more like this user illusion,
right? So
orgasms, intense pain, captivating colors, all of this stuff that, in like, you know, Sellers' phrase, make life worth living.
Yeah, and all the background hum of sensation in this, in Humphrey's term, which, you know, this is what, you know, sort of.
So maybe octopuses
gives a character to our existence.
So maybe octopuses don't need that. Like, an octopus needs to stay alive long enough to make a baby octopus, and I might be screwing up my octopus biology, but my understanding is that like after octopus like reproduces, there's really no point in that octopus persisting. But humans long ago have evolved this kind of way of being where we really depend on each other in a very long-term sort of way. Like, we need people to go beyond, to keep on living, even beyond, you know, being able to reproduce, or maybe even beyond being able to help care for the young. Like, we need them for other sorts of reasons. Like, maybe it's really important to have a bunch of wise elderly people to keep the culture going. That's been evolutionarily beneficial, and the main way that nature figured out how to keep people from just like, you know, running off of a cliff when they stop having orgasms, is to like buy into this illusion of the self, or the illusion of the awesomeness of simply having experiences. And so maybe there's all sorts of animals that in some thin sense are aware or conscious, in that they're detecting their environment and are able to store information and act on that information. But for us, we have this distinction between seeing Keith Frankish versus just thinking like, oh yeah, Keith Frankish is I think he's over there right now.
And I think this is you know, this is important. This is the real distinction that we, and again, it's not a sharp one, that we're tracking with this misguided talk about primary secondary qualities maybe, and sensation perception. So, and it's important to bear in mind all the points you've just made, because if we just ignore this, then we kind of yield the ground to the people who want to talk about what it's like and how this presents a mystery, because we have a story here we can tell, which we can tell in perfectly, you know, naturalistic third-person scientific terms, in terms of psychological processes and so on. And we can give an explanation that can meet all of their, not their demands in the way that they frame them, but that can meet the intuitions that are motivating them. people want some sort of account of, they don't want to talk that an orgasm is just certain sorts of, sort of nerve firings in the genital region or something. They want something a bit richer than that. And we can give them that. We don't have to, again, it's
right.
It's
but here's
just
why
saying,
I'm still a qualia quietist, and not an illusionist. I think it is extremely misleading to say about this like Nick Humphrey story.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, by the way, that's all there is to say about phenomenal consciousness. I think it's better to say, look, here is a datum that's a really cool and interesting datum that kind of lives in this thicket, which is, the consciousness studies thicket. And it's this datum about like, look, there seems to be this important difference between like seeing Keith Frankish, just thinking about Keith Frankish, or having an orgasm versus remembering one from last week. Seems like a big difference. What does that difference consist in? Why do some animals have it and others don't? And maybe they all do, but like we've got reason to think that they don't. That's a very narrow datum. And I think a bit of a disservice to the phenomenal consciousness nuts to say like, oh, hey, guys, this is what y'all been talking about. I think it isn't what they've been talking about. Part of what they've been talking about is like the foundations of empirical knowledge and sense data theory. And like,
you're absolutely right. But they've been able. Yep, absolutely. But that's as it were, the soil in which those weeds, those philosophical weeds have grown. There is
maybe not.
Well, it's so easy to get people to adopt this, to adopt a sort of quality of realism. It's really quite easy. As I say, you get them to think about an after image or something, or you get them to think about spectrum inversion. They have really no problem thinking about it. So there's something that allows these ideas to flow. The idea that there's something that you couldn't be illusory. That there's something that immediately, namely what it's like to be. These ideas get hold of people very easily, and then you build these.
There's a lot of things people believe easily. I don't think that's gonna.
But that's interesting. I mean, they believe it easily. I mean, it's not so easy
to get people to think that the Earth is flat easily, or that the Earth is the center of the.
It looks flat. I mean, it's not easy to get people to believe that this table is conscious. I mean, you have to really do some hard work.
I don't think all bad ideas have a common source. Maybe there's some surprising common sources.
They have a source. I mean,
or other.
Yeah, we've been over this ground, I think, before. So let's try another question. Because I know James of Seattle asked a question. I think one of the first questions that was posted here was by him. So we owe him an answer. And the one that I found here is about LLMs. Do you want to have a look at that?
Oh, what is the question?
It depends whether we can think of anything sensible. How is consciousness different from pattern recognition? Suppose an LLM's training included coded input from a pattern recognizer.
I remember that question.
So that when it sees blue, it's rewarded for talking about seeing blue. So that's during training. When interacting later, putting something blue in front of the camera will make the LLM respond accordingly. Is it having blue qualia?
You want me to go first, or you want to go?
You go first, Pete.
So I think one of the things that is worth, I find, getting out in the open early on is that there's two main guiding thoughts about consciousness that people don't take enough care about. So one thing that goes along with thinking about consciousness is thinking of consciousness in terms of being conscious of something, right? So we're thinking of consciousness whenever we're thinking about something as in any way having a take on the world.
Yeah.
Right. So we might call that transitive consciousness. It's you've got a subject and there's something that they're conscious of. But there's this other guiding thought about consciousness, whereby consciousness is something like one's own awareness of one's mental states as such. And arguably, when consciousness enters the English language back in the 1600s, that's what they had in mind. Like etymologically, that's why we took this like Latin thing, conscious, with knowing, or right, which originally meant something like when multiple people know something, right? So you don't just know about it, Keith. Pete knows about it too, and maybe we know that the other guy knows. That's with knowing, and that got morphed into this thing that a single person can do. A single person can have with knowing with themselves or by themselves, and that's around the time that you get to like John Locke saying it as it's an English word. This originally like Latin thing. So consciousness is a perception of what passes through a man's own mind. Put it in his sexist idiom. I'm sure women have this also, and that kind of like guides a lot of contemporary discussions of consciousness. When you think of consciousness in terms of something being conscious of something else, it's very easy to say like, oh sure, any kind of pattern recognition, anything that looks like detecting a stimulus, and then even more than that, like being able to react to it in a way that reflects past detections. That's a kind of consciousness. There, the intuition is like that we're thinking about consciousness of, but what you wouldn't necessarily get automatically from that is this kind of self with knowing, where you not only are detecting a pattern, but you're somehow recording the fact that you're detecting it, right? So you're detecting your own detectors. Call it like metacognition or self recognition or self awareness. And
sounds very like higher order thought theory.
I mean, like higher
which was
thought.
A question someone asked. So let's
I don't want
on that at the same time.
Okay. So I'm not a higher order thought theorist, in part because I don't think that one of these wins the day is what consciousness is all about. But the only point I wanted to make is a point that it could have been easier said by using the detestable phrase. Well, it depends on what you mean by consciousness. I'm sure everyone gets annoyed by philosophers saying, well, it depends on what you mean by fill in the blank. But oftentimes we think of consciousness in these two separate ways. And one point that higher order thought theorists make a lot, and I like them for this, is they will point out that there's this long history of using consciousness in the second way, whereby we are drawing a distinction between mental states that are conscious and mental states that aren't conscious. And so we will talk about mental states as occurring unconsciously. So maybe there's subliminal perception, or there's all sorts of things that you're doing in a way that's adaptive, modulating your gait because the ground has gotten bumpier, or the height between the stairs has increased. You don't know, you're not aware, you're not introspecting that visual information has had an influence on how you're moving your legs, but that's what's happened. If we turn the lights off, you'd fall down the stairs, and that shows that information has gotten in and gotten processed in a way that's worth calling sensory or perceptual, and it's engaging with past knowledge, some of which might even be represented in a conceptual form that is like depends on parsing things as stairs instead of shadows. But you're not aware of it. You're not conscious of your consciousness of the external world. And that seems paradoxical to a lot of people that aren't familiar with like higher order thought theory. Higher order thought theory's got a great way of making that sound non-paradoxical. I just like the further step of saying, like, by the way, this is what all consciousness is.
Yeah, no, I agree totally. I mean, metacognition, it's metacognition's part of this ragbag of stuff that we talk about when we use the word consciousness, and it's an important part of it. But the idea that metacognition sort of suddenly makes the lights come on is just, yeah. I would say that what I would say about LLMs is one of the reasons I think it's kind of ridiculous to talk about LLMs as being conscious in any interesting sense is that I think consciousness, when we talk about experience in the everyday sense, we're talking about this kind of rich sensitivity to the affordances of the world, and maybe our awareness of that rich sensitivity. And the point is that LLMs don't have much of a sensitivity to the affordances of the world. All they're sensitive to is linguistic stimulation. They're not sensitive to anything, and there's nothing, and all it affords them is a linguistic response. There's nothing else it affords them. There's no other action an LLM can take beyond outputting some text. And I don't know, I
disagree with a whole bunch of that.
I know you do. I just want to say, first of all, so I think that when we talk about experience, we're thinking about a whole Dennett called it framing the brain. The idea that a whole lot of things are being afforded to us simultaneously, and it's our ability to, as it were, our sensitivity to all these affordances that we're gesturing at when we talk about the character of experience. There's nothing. The LLM's just got one single modality. It inputs, it hears text, and it outputs text, and the world affords it nothing but more speech. So, it's the thinnest sort of, if you want to call it kind of conscious, the thinnest possible single dimension.
You remind me of people like, for example, Anil Seth, who say things like, "Look, we don't actually perceive the external world. We do this other thing." And maybe Anil doesn't go this far, but there's a very far version of it whereby, like, we don't even actually experience anything except the inside of our own brains, and that is really fucked up in a philosophical. I am projecting.
You're projecting your enemies onto me here.
I'm lampooning your view. You're not, instead of charitably interpreting it.
You're taken what I said as an occasion to have a pop at one of your favorite targets, which I agree with. This is bioluminescence. I don't have any. I don't. But if that's the way you're going with it.
But there's a very specific problem I want to focus in on, and that's the view that we somehow know or could ever know. Like, well, what are we really doing, or what are we really thinking about, or what are we really experiencing? And we draw some kind of boundary or border. One way to draw the border is with the inside of the brain. An older way to do it is with the inside of the mind. But it's ultimately a Cartesian kind of view, right? So, like, all the stuff about the dreaming hypothesis, the demon hypothesis, there's this inner realm, the mind, about which one what's going on in there. And then there's this external cause of it that might as well not be there. And so that gets revivified in brain language as, instead of your mind, it's your sensory periphery. You don't experience objects in the world. You just experience your own sensory tingles or your brain's reaction to sensory tingles. That has all the problems of the Cartesian picture. The fact that Descartes was a substance dualist is here irrelevant. The problem is that it makes sense to draw the line anywhere and say, this is what you're really thinking about, or this is what you're really talking about. Like, we have an environment and the AI doesn't have an environment. We're reacting to distal causes, not just proximal stimuli, but the AI only has proximal stimuli. The AI is only receiving linguistic outputs and outputting linguistic outputs. There's a sense in which I think that there's a lot of important similarities between the LLMs and humans. That, the fact that we have eyes and ears might not mean much. A lot of what we think we see, it's actually based on what we hear, and vice versa.
I wasn't, but you weren't really listening to what I said, because I wasn't just talking about input. I was talking about what actions the input affords us. Now, I agree that you can get all sorts of information by all sorts of different kinds of channels, and the channel nature of the channel doesn't necessarily matter too much. I was talking about what it affords. I like to think about experience in terms of the affordances. Now, what actions does the environment afford an LLM? And it's the richness of those affordances that I think makes the richness of what we gesture when we talk about experience and conscious. What actions
you have you have a different environment than the LLM, but if you want to say that the LLM doesn't have an environment,
no, I'm not talking about its environment. I'm talking about its actions. What kind of actions can an LLM perform?
A whole bunch of actions.
Go on then, tell me a few of them.
So one of the things it could do is it can make a video.
Well, not just as
another thing it could do is
LLM as a large man. You've got to hook it up to small stuff. You could hook it up to all
you have to be hooked up to things also. You have to.
Well, okay. If you start hooking it up to a whole bunch of stuff, then it can afford it all sorts of other actions. I was thinking
it's always hooked up.
I mean, about chat. If we're talking about a chatbot, what can a chatbot do?
All sorts of things.
Go on.
Well, one of the things that it could do is it could write an essay for you.
Yeah,
now,
linguistic output. Yeah,
but I think that we have to be very very careful and deliberate in how we parse this, right? So here's a very simple problem that you say you ask the LLM how many R's are in the word strawberry. It ought to know that. Maybe it can't really tell you without relying on someone else what color strawberries are, but it should know how many R's there are in the word strawberry. Well, until pretty recently, they would fuck that up all the time and say 14 R's or 0 R's, and the reason why is that there's some sense in which they don't have access to the letters that before any kind of linguistic input goes into the network, it first gets parsed into tokens. There's a tokenization pre-processing step. So they're seeing something kind of like morphemes, but it's not individual letters. It's not individual words. And so there are these different streams of processing. And some of them are worth calling pre-processing. Some of them are worth calling what happened out there before even the training data was made. There's all these different points in the causal chain, but that's also true of human beings. It's so much of your response to things and your ability to act depends on all this supporting material, depends on culture.
I'm not denying that. What I'm saying is that when we gesture at the character of our experience, we're talking about what things mean for us. About the world is meaningful to us. It presents us with, well, I'm carefully using that, but us as organisms with opportunities, with threats, with invitations. It pushes and pulls us and entices us and pushes. And now, my point is that the LLM as a chatbot, where it's not connected up to if you connect up a whole lot of robotic stuff, then maybe we start to get into this realm. The world doesn't have any of that meaning for it, because it cannot do any of those things. It cannot eat. It cannot have sex. It cannot.
It can do some of those things. It could do certain aspects of those things. They're the same aspects that you're able to do. But
if it's a chatbot, all it can do is talk about them.
No, I don't think you get to say that.
Really?
Some of the things it could do are things done with words, and if these things have any kind of agentive capabilities in the technical sense used for AI agents, right? It could initiate a search, so it could send information out into the internet. It's not sending it to me. It's not putting it on my monitor. It's doing a web search. So it's outputting to the rest of the internet, and then it's getting data back from it. And some of that data is data that is extracted from, for example, YouTube videos. There's some other process out there that is taking YouTube videos and making transcripts of them.
Okay, then maybe we get a larger system then. Okay, if you want to expand the boundaries of the system, I mean, where we divide up systems is to some extent arbitrary. But what we get into here is whether the thing has goals and whether it has needs. And again, we might get into the weeds a bit there, but I've got an argument for saying that it's inappropriate to ascribe a rich range of goals to it, including communicative goals. But maybe that's something that that's for another time. I'm conscious that time's going on, and so I just want to see if we can get through a few more.
Well, somebody asked about what it's like. That I thought that was. I personally found that interesting, but maybe if you,
you go for that. Well, let me just read. I just want to acknowledge Katerina's question here. I don't think I can address. I'm getting a bit tired. And I don't think I can address it properly because it's a good question. So I want to read it out. And oh no, I'm sorry. That's the second. That's the follow up to it. Just a moment. How is this working? Just a moment. Here it is. Bear with me. Here we go. Okay. Hello, Keith and Pete. What do you think about the connection between illusionist accounts and embodied approaches? When I read evolutionary explanations of the illusion, I see a connection there. Specifically, it's implied in Dennett's work that the illusion not only enables us to communicate, but was also shaped through active social interactions, e.g. communicative actions with others. I think all I'm going to do here is acknowledge that this is an interesting question, something I'd like to think about, but I don't think I trust myself at the moment to try and engage with it. But I don't. Do you want to come in? I just want to acknowledge that it's an interesting question.
I think everything is embodied. I kind of. I don't get what embodiment theorists think they're rebelling against. There's a lot of the embodiment literature that I think is cool and interesting. Like,
well, I think they're rebelling against the idea that you might be a Boltzmann brain.
Oh gosh, I think you might be a Boltzmann brain if that's what they're up on about. That's not.
How could you be? Look.
Oh
could
gosh,
could this be a Boltzmann mug?
Sure.
Could this be a? It could be. It could just be existing on its own in outer space.
It's a finite collection of particles that that could reconfigure themselves randomly.
Absolutely could. Is there any reason to think it is?
Is there any positive reason to think it is?
Well, it seems to belong here in this environment with all the other stuff, and I can knock it against things here.
So I suggest that people look up the Poincare recurrence theorem and see what they think of that. But
I think the Boltzmann brain hypothesis, this is something we could get into another time. In fact, you might make another show. I think it depends on precisely the sort of Cartesianism that you reject.
Maybe.
Maybe not. Maybe I don't.
It depends on if you're entitled to assume that what's normal or not. Anyway, leaving Boltzmann.
Anyway, but I think that's something we could do. It. We could get into that one. It'd be interesting.
Yeah, we should. I like Boltzmann brains. But real quick,
I know
there's good, cool stuff that kind of tracks the embodiment or disembodied approaches to cognitive science. If you look at like early attempts at computational vision, right? Trying to do machine vision, figure out what it would take for a Turing machine, a universal Turing machine, to process video input in a way that results in what we think we're able to do. Like, you give us some two-dimensional array of electromagnetic radiation, and then we're able to say like, oh, there's a cylinder. The cone is in front of the cylinder. It turns out that shit is super hard to do. But there's some ways of making the problem a bit easier, and that is to have the universal Turing machine with the camera strapped to the front of it, also in a mobile unit that's able to move around. Mm-hmm. Now it has actually much more tractable problems to solve. One of the sorts of things that get cited in these early literatures is the use of tau to catch a baseball. Where, so here's a problem that humans are able to solve, at least some of us, with the aid of our vision, and that is to see a baseball fly. It's a small, tiny speck, and a fielder is able to reach up their mitt and catch it, and they're able to run back and forth to get under it. And you might think that's a super difficult problem from this computational view of machine vision. Like, how do you map this this array that has a dot in it, and it's getting bigger, but it's also, you're moving around and stuff. And what tau is, this very simple mathematical property of the stimulus in the visual field. And I don't remember exactly what tau is, but it's a number that you can calculate based on these geometric relations. And what the catcher has figured out to do, perhaps not consciously, is just minimize tau. They just move around.
Just to repeat this.
Yeah, go ahead.
Somebody's pressing the bell. We just got to go and check.
Little does he know, it's me. No, it's not me. Well, I'm going to keep on talking so that the viewers aren't too bored, and I'll repeat it for Keith's benefit. Okay, so the point is, with tau, there's this. Keith, I was just stalling. I wasn't saying anything.
I thought I'd give you an opportunity to do a bit of improv.
So the bit about tau is, it turns out there's this much simpler problem, and you solve that problem. You just make sure that the tau is maximized or minimized. And then you will catch the baseball, or at least it'll hit some part of your body. So that's cool embodiment, where there's a problem that we thought had to be solved in terms of, like, okay, there's a sphere out there, and then the coefficient of parallax is this, and then, like, we have to take into account acceleration. No, you don't have to factor anything about the three-dimensional location of the ball at all. You could just reduce it to this very simple problem, having to do with this kind of two-dimensional array, and then maximizing tau, this mathematical thing defined with respect to that two-dimensional array. And part of the simplification comes in from the fact that you yourself are able to move.
Yeah, look, I mean,
that's cool embodiment.
But that's not what that's part of the story. I mean, active exploration, absolutely, yeah. But the more interesting claim, I think, is that the system we're trying to describe isn't confined within the skull. These people like dynamical systems modeling, and they think that crucial factors in the evolution of the system that you need to include in the model are external to the skull. Now, I think you should be sympathetic to that idea. There's nothing special about this boundary, and that if you just try to describe the evolution of what's in here without including parameters that are out there, you're not going to do it properly. That's the key idea. Right. Now, you should like that, but you don't for some reason.
Well, some of them go all the way in the other direction. And say,
go find up in the other direction, and you're Cartesian.
But so, like, people to say, like, we don't need representations at all. We could just do it in terms of this, like, Gibsonian, like, there's this external world out there, and there's this ambient information array. We don't need anything at all that looks like
that's dynamical systems theory.
Yeah, I don't like that. Anyway, but
I know you don't, but I think you should. I think you should, though, because it's more. You see. Let's look. I'm going to have to wrap up soon because my family are pressing me, and it's 20 to 10 here in the evening. But Anna Strasser has now, I think, twice asked this question. And I think we should address it. Can you imagine an entity to which you would attribute agency but no intelligence at all? I know Anna is thinking a lot about questions to do with agency and AI. And here's a bit of background to that. I think that agency and intelligence do not necessarily require consciousness. However, agency and intelligence seem to necessarily occur together. Can I
be quick?
Yep.
Yes. And I recommend people read an old paper of mine called something like the evolution of neural representations.
Mm-hmm.
It appeared in Biology and Philosophy, and that's the name of the journal, Biology and Philosophy. And in this paper, I'm talking about these like problems about how to attribute mental states to neural systems,
Mm-hmm.
and how to like under what conditions would you say this network that is helping this little organism do stuff, under what
Mm-hmm.
conditions would you attribute to it anything that looks cognitive, anything that looks conative. I've never said that word out loud. It's one of those words I only read. Conative or conative. So
I
like
say
desires and
cognitive.
intentions versus beliefs and perceptions and
Mm-hmm.
knowledge. And in that paper, I argue, and I think this is something that is very Millikan-ish. I
Mm-hmm.
don't remember if I was under the influence of Millikan at the time, but
Mm-hmm.
part of what I was doing and reporting in this paper is I was running these computer simulations of these simple neural network controlled artificial organisms. Hey, somebody who knows my CV better than I do. That's the name of the paper. Varieties of representation in evolved and embodied neural networks. Oh, look,
What
I'm an
what a
embodiment guy.
classy classy fans you have, Pete.
Yeah.
They,
They read my papers, something I don't do.
they,
But
yeah.
so one of the things I argued there, and this might be pertinent to Anna's question, is that you could have a creature that I
Mm-hmm.
dramatically call a creature of pure will, and
Mm-hmm.
um, that could predate a creature that, in addition to having will,
Mm-hmm.
um, also has takes on the world. So, given the way the argument goes, is like given the structure of Darwinian theory and the flows of information that you would have in virtue of thinking about evolution in terms of a selectionist, natural selection sort of thing, you could reconstruct the notion of something having a will, um, independently of something having like perceptions and memories of those perceptions, but not vice versa. It wouldn't make any sense for something to have perception from an evolutionary perspective. There'd be nothing for it to do with those perceptions. They wouldn't affect um, its viability as a reproducer unless they were able to plug into action. But you could have things that are plugging into action that are, in some sense, like blind. Like for example, the central pattern generators that keep your heart going or maintain the gait of an animal. That's just like this repeating um, motor signal that you could also regard as conative in the sense of having um, a head world direction of fit instead of a world head direction of fit. So yes,
Mm.
but you got to assume a basic Darwin picture to do that, to get that off the ground.
I think I think a lot. There's just a comment there that occurred to me. A lot of people like to think of LLMs in terms of or AIs in terms of in evolutionary terms. I don't think LLMs are doing that. But they're actually well. One thing that LLMs are doing is saying the right sort of things to make humans replicate and evolve them in vast trillions of dollars. I'm not quite sure that that's right. After all, it's. Do you agree with that? Would you say that LLMs are doing that?
Well, I mean, I want to say yes, sure. One way of thinking about what anybody is doing is like, well, what's happening as some kind of causal.
Well, it's happening. Yeah.
But another way of thinking about what somebody or something is doing is what they are causing to happen on purpose or intentionally.
Yes,
But then
exactly.
that gets into the problem of like, well, what were they trying to do? Were they trying to cause somebody to die, or were they just trying to get a bullet to fly out of a gun, or were they trying to topple a nation? Like, what was in their mind? And in some sense, I kind of believe in the death of the author, even with respect to like the stories we tell ourselves. No there's no right answer to, well, what exactly was I trying to do, or what did I mean when I said, Keith, you look good in those pants? Like, what was I trying to do, or what did I offend you? Did I commit a crime? Did I mean to commit a crime? Like, in some sense, there's no there. And so the question of like, well, what are LLMs really doing? Like, rapidly just turns into the sort of question I think is a dumb question. Like, can't Keith, can you really see that Christmas tree behind you? Like, if you turn and look at it, can you really see it? And you might say like, well, if I can't see that, like, what does seeing even mean? But you could get overly philosophical and say like, well, you don't really see the tree, you just see your mental representation of the tree, or you see the local stimulus. And I think trying to carve these lines and say like one of these is the right way of carving it all up is
my worry was just my basic was just, are LLMs LLMs are they replicators? Do they replicate?
Yes.
That seem more like, well, do they? They don't self-replicate, certainly.
Well, no one self-replicates.
Well,
not even amoebas self-replicate. Like everything that it's so-called a self-replicator depends on all sorts of other things. And
yeah, but then does a paperclip replicate? Then I mean,
yes,
well, yeah, but then we've but I don't think we want to talk about.
I think there are interesting. So there are interesting distinctions that you might draw. You might say that with most forms of biological life, there is this very specific mechanism that they all have in common. That there's like nuclear DNA, and I'm going to screw up the biology of it, but for many of the replicators on this planet, you've got a nucleus, and there's DNA in the nucleus, and then don't get me started on what the mitochondria are doing. There's some crazy stuff. But then you've got these other replicators, arguably prions are replicators. They're even less independent than viruses are. Viruses are very dependent, but there's a somewhat abstract way of thinking about replication, whereby replication is when a thing exists and it given the nature of its existence, it's a major causal contributor to there being more of them. So you don't have to even address the question of like what's self-replication versus what's just being manufactured in a factory. There are these things, and some of these things make copies of themselves. It's in some sense of make copies of themselves. There's more of them, and the reason there's more of them is that each of them has the causal power to be a major player in there being more of them. And so you could take a perspective on things like bullets or paper clips or tornadoes, whereby some of these things are really quite good, like crystals. Crystals are really quite good at making more crystals.
Yeah.
And many of the crystals that you encounter aren't crystals that formed from non-crystals. They're crystals such that other crystals of the same type and same chemical composition were a major causal contributor to there being this crystal. This crystal had parents, and it had parents. And that's a kind of replication. Now that doesn't mean that
I think
it's
yeah. I mean,
alive, but it's at least
yeah.
replication.
I grant you that you can. Yeah,
And so
you can.
so
But
things like artifacts and memes, part of what shapes their fitness is stuff like, well, how they interact with this environment that has like human users in it. And there are really interesting similarities between like the lineages of artifacts and the lineages of biological organisms. There's all sorts
yeah.
of concepts from
I,
biology that fruitfully apply to thinking about like um, the evolution of shoes, or right, and some of like the forces that contributed to books being this shape versus that shape has to do with these, thinking of it in terms of like, well, this is more conducive to its replicability.
I genuinely don't know to what extent evolutionary theory would be applicable to manufactured objects. I don't know, partly because they're embedded in social network and it's human purposive activity is involved in their production. Unlike memes, say, which kind of spread without people deciding to adopt them. So I think you can probably do it for memes. I'm not sure how well you can do it for artifacts that are crafted to meet a particular human need.
There's a point that I believe I get from William Wimsatt, a philosopher of science, William Wimsatt, and he publishes all this stuff about how complex everything is. And so his remark about applying evolutionary theory to things like memes and also things like artifacts is something like, there's some sense in which it's true, but it's so complicated as to be intractable.
Right.
And so, like, at least with the case of biological evolution, there's so many constraints built into how that works that you get these patterns that are tractable to human scientists. But with respect to memes and artifacts, there's just so many degrees of freedom that only God can really apply evolutionary theory to it in any kind of constructive way, where you could make predictions and or give explanations that are anything but just post hoc. Given the complexity of the situation, it's kind of doomed. But that doesn't mean it's not happening. It just means we can't track it.
Yeah. But you need to have it. I mean, it seems that I don't know, but it seems that to get the mathematics of evolutionary modeling going, you're going to need some sort of fairly sort of tightly defined replicator package, which is the gene. And if it stays kind of distributed between the different people and social structures and stuff, and markets and all kinds of economic forces, and so I just don't see how you're going to get this.
I want to really quickly recommend a fun book to people by Manuel de Landa. It's this book called War in the Age of Intelligent Machines. And he starts off the book with this theory of machine, whereby machines predate organisms. So like one of the earliest motors is like the hurricane. And then later on, you get things like bullets and paper clips or whatever. And he's telling this evolutionary story in a sense from the point of view of these machines. So like the evolution of the conical bullet instead of the ball and all that is a story about how these different shapes in some sense figured out that this is a better way to make copies of themselves. In the same way that Mother Nature figures things out. It's not literally thinking and figuring things out, but nonetheless, from this perspective, you can see how like these were really smart moves for these things that go around in circles, or these things that travel in straight lines. These machines in the very simple sense of like a wedge and a wheel and an axle and a lever. These machines have adapted to get the animals, these weird animals with thumbs, to make more copies of them. And so that's why chairs look this way versus that way, because the chairs figured out that that's a better way to make baby chairs, is to be more comfortable to the contemporary worker or something like that.
I know that's
War in the Age of Intelligent Machines by Manuel de Landa. It's kind of continental-ish, but I'm not afraid of continental philosophy.
I'm
Mark,
I'm
one of the
I'm
Marx
I'm
once told
picking
me,
that up. I'm seeing worrying signs here. I got back in the 90s, we would not have had any of this. At least in the sort of departments where I was. I'm going to have to wrap up before I absolutely fall asleep. But I apologize. I think we both apologize. Well, so are you getting?
I have merch. One of them is Boltzmann Brain merch.
That's an interesting topic. I think we could probably
I love Boltzmann brains.
Yeah, I don't. First, I just want to apologize to anyone whose questions we didn't get around to. I'm slightly disorganized here.
Some of them were really very good questions.
They were. I may have deliberately avoided some that I didn't able to tackle, but we'll do this again, and we'll have another opportunity. I want to thank everyone for engaging. I hope we've been interesting. I hope we've at least given you things to think about, even if we've not given you answers. That's what philosophers are best at, I think, is getting other people to answer, getting people to answer their own questions rather than answering them for them. At least that's my excuse.
I just want people to join my cult. My wife and I have been watching a bunch of documentaries about cults, and I'm thinking, like, why am I sleeping on this thing? Just start a cult. We're all Boltzmann brains. That's going to be our one belief.
Loafus 9797 enjoyed it anyway, so thank you very much. And Alan praises my Socratic method. So thank you, everyone. We'll see you again another time. Hope you all have a happy holidays.
And a happy new year.
Happy New Year.
Next year is going to be great.
Can't believe you're still going. Yeah, Mike, I am getting old. But
does he mean alive or awake?
I think he means that we're still recording, but
okay.
I was jokingly interpreting it as meaning that I'm still alive. Happy Christmas! Always good to see the Marks.
Yeah,
happy New Year!
Excellent.
Happy New Year to all.
Thank you.
Yes, let's hope that for a year full of persuasion of a positive kind on all sides. Cheerio, everyone. Have a good time.